race fans, my name is Taylor and welcome back to Above the Yellow Line, the show where we talk all about the NASCAR Cup Series. As you can see, things are a little bit different behind me. We're in a new setup. We're making it work though as I'm back at school. Very excited for that, but also excited to continue with Above the Yellow Line. So this episode, we're going to take it back to Michigan International Speedway for the FireKeepers Casino 400, reviewing that race. Then we're going to go to updates and hot takes, finally end with a preview of the Coke Zero Sugar 400 at Daytona International Speedway, a race I am highly anticipating. So without further ado, let's get to it. The FireKeepers Casino 400 was a pretty exciting race, especially towards the end, with, I would say, a surprise winner. Up on the screen is the results for that race, with Ryan Blaney holding off the Hendrick Motorsports brigade of Byron and Larson to win the FireKeepers Casino 400. This is Blaney's first season with multiple wins, and I think there is no better place to get this win other than the track that Ford's wheelhouse. So congrats to him and his crew chief Todd Gordon, who is stepping out of the role at the end of this season. Though Blaney got a big victory for Ford, I'm pretty shocked that there was only 3 Fords in the top 10. Obviously, they're not on a hot streak like Hendrick Motorsports or the Chevys are, or like the Toyotas seem to be on, as they're competing against each other pretty well. But Matt DiBenedetto finished inside the top 10 along with Blaney, and then Keselowski, which I didn't think would happen. And we're going to talk about that now with Down the Line, talking about 2 key moments of the race. Moment number 1 is between Austin Dillon and Brad Keselowski. If you saw the race, you know exactly what I'm talking about, but to refresh your brain a little bit, at the end of stage 2, both drivers crossed the line, battling hard for position. Austin Dillon crossed the line in 6th, Brad Keselowski in 7th, and after they crossed the line, it seems that Brad Keselowski spun Austin Dillon out, ending in a pretty horrific and nasty wreck. Austin Dillon was okay, his car almost flipped, but it ended Austin Dillon's day and also made his playoff hopes very tricky. In my opinion, I feel like this was a racing incident. Brad Keselowski is smarter than this. He was very animated on the driver radio saying this is not what he meant to do. He just meant to move him a little bit, maybe some of that, but I think Brad is smarter than this. And unfortunately for Austin Dillon, like I said, ruined his day, ended his day, and he did have a race-winning car. I thought that he was going to win this race. He had a very strong car. He was very fast. He was able to compete and keep up with the Hendrick Motorsports cars. So it was very unfortunate for Austin Dillon. However, it wasn't as unfortunate as it may have seemed. What seemed like a must-win situation quickly turned into a points-playing situation, as his teammate, who he is competing against to get that final spot into the playoffs, did not do so hot in the final stage of the race. And one of the last restarts, Tyler Reddick made a not-so-great move. I think we can all agree it was not going to work. Trying to squeeze in somewhere he would not fit. Ended up wrecking out a few cars, including my race pick for last weekend, Joey Logano. I was not happy about that. Joey was doing fine before then, and of course I jinxed it. I will admit I probably jinxed Joey Logano, took him out of the race, and in turn made Tyler Reddick go back in the pack as he had to fix some damage here and there, and also messed up on one of the final restarts besides that one, making him finish in the late 20th positions. And because of this, points-wise, now Austin Dillon and Tyler Reddick are 25 points apart going into the round of 16. Tyler Reddick 25 points to the good, Austin Dillon 25 points in the negative. So we could still see a pretty intense points race going into Daytona International Speedway for the 2 teammates, unless a new driver wins. However, I'm a little weary. I'm thinking a new driver's going to win. I want to see it, but I think we're going to see an interesting and intense battle between teammates Austin Dillon and Tyler Reddick going into the Coke Zero Sugar 400. Moment number 2 and the final moment in Down the Line has to do with Hendrick Motorsports. I want to preface this by saying I do not mean to bash the team. I am a fan of their team. I'm a fan of their drivers. However, I think I've noticed something that might help you when you make your fantasy lineup or when you're watching a race that could potentially help your favorite driver if they figured out this too. But I think I found the answer to what would be potentially beneficial to defeating Hendrick Motorsports. One answer I'm aware of, and I'm sure we all are, is mistakes. We see Hendrick Motorsports making small mistakes here and there. Maybe one driver in particular on the team makes more mistakes than the others, and in this case I am talking about Chase Elliott, as it seems almost weekly they're either put to the back of the pack before the race starts with implications to their car, or during the race they'll make a pit stop mistake. They need to be firing on all cylinders. Everyone's brain needs to be in the game, and I see a lot of the times with Chase Elliott's team, though they are very good and consistent, if they did not have as many mistakes, I guarantee they would have more wins at this point. However, this is not what I'm talking about when I talk about what the problem is for the team. I'm talking about when it comes to racing your teammates, and here's what I mean by that. Hendrick Motorsports struggles to compete against each other on the track. We don't see this with Joe Gibbs Racing as much, and I feel like we certainly do not see this with Penske, as they give each other no wiggle room and are actually willing to wreck out their teammate for a win. So the problem I see with Hendrick Motorsports is when they're back-to-back on the track. Let's say, for example, this weekend with Ryan Blaney, he was able to take advantage of that and win the race, though it was not an easy win by any stretch of the imagination for Blaney to hold off the strong cars of Byron and Larson. They were so busy, I think, fighting each other for position that they didn't catch Ryan Blaney moving to a different line, taking the lead and winning the race. Now, this is not to say that the Hendrick Motorsports cars are not aggressive and don't fight hard for wins. That is not the case at all. But when it comes to each other, they're a little nicer, giving each other more leeway, which allows cars behind them to catch up. We see this with maybe a road course race, was particularly 2 weeks ago, or 2 road course races ago, when Martin Truex Jr. was able to catch up to Larson and Elliott as they were trying to fight each other for the lead, almost making it a 3-way race for the first position. So we see that with the road courses, we see this with other races, even stage wins for this team, and I think this could potentially be their downfall when it goes into the playoffs. At that point, it has to be every man for yourselves. You're fighting for your team to get the playoff championship. So at this point, Hendrick Motorsports maybe needs to think through, this is a team effort, but what can I do to advance my team spot in the playoffs? And that might come push to shove, and that also might come with upsetting your teammate. And at this point, I think they have to be okay with it, because if they want to win a championship, they have to start thinking for their individual teams and not as a whole. So those are my 2 key moments from Michigan International Speedway with Brad Keselowski, Austin Dillon, and then Hendrick Motorsports, and picking out what I see them faltering on. But now it's time to close out this race and last weekend, rating this race above or below the yellow line to see where it stands. This race had a little bit of everything. It was very intriguing, but it was not totally engaging for me the whole time. And that is a little bit counterintuitive in saying those 2 things, but what I liked about this race is there was not a clear winner the entire time. You might think one driver was going to win the race, and the next moment you see another driver. We all thought Austin Dillon might win the race, and then he's crashed out. Then you're like, well, who's next? And I thought it was also great that we didn't totally see one team dominate the day. That was very exciting for me to watch. However, this was more of a super speedway type race. I'm not against that, but sometimes it's like we're going through the motions until the end when it really matters and crazy things are going to happen, which is what we saw. I think the end of this race in the last maybe 20 laps really sold it for me and really gave this race rating a higher score than I originally had planned. However, this does race higher than last weekend's race, and I'm going to give this one, the FireKeepers Casino 400, a 78%. That is all with Michigan International Speedway's race. Now let's move into the present with some updates and hot takes from the world of NASCAR and beyond. We have to start with Stewart-Haas Racing and news that they released this week about their sandwich loyalties, their change in sides, because we have Subway stepping back into the picture of the NASCAR world, putting their logo on Kevin Harvick's car for 2 races at Bristol and Kansas, acting as a primary sponsor for those races and an associate sponsor for the remainder of the season. As we know, Subway is not new to NASCAR. They actually worked with Tony Stewart when he drove for Joe Gibbs Racing, so it's kind of nice to see Subway step back into the picture as a part of the Stewart-Haas Racing family. Though it's going to be very weird to see Jimmy John's not on Kevin Harvick's car. It's going to be a little jarring at first, and I'm sure maybe the season wasn't the best for Kevin Harvick. Maybe they stepped out. I'm not here to decipher that. I just know that they're on their way out and Subway's making things fresh, stepping back into the picture. Horrible, horrible joke, I know, but nevertheless, I'm excited to see that new partnership, what they have in store, and maybe in the future they'll add on more primary sponsor races going into next season with the new next-gen car. I think it's a good partnership. They have history there, and I'm excited to see where it takes them in the future. Finally, now that we are headed into the playoffs, I thought this would be a good opportunity to answer some of your fan questions you sent in using the hashtag ATYL podcast pertaining to the playoffs and some thoughts there. So let's start off with our first question from Gabe. The question reads, who do you see as potential sleepers in the playoffs? I think this is a great question I've been thinking about for the past few weeks as the playoff picture has started to build up to this point. We have one spot still open, so that's why I'm kind of leaving this question open-ended a little bit, because if there is a new winner that's able to win this weekend and get into that spot, they could be a dark horse or potentially not. Maybe they get lucky at the end of the race. But there are 3 drivers I want to talk about in particular that I think could shake up the playoff standings as they go into the final weeks leading to the championship race. If he wins, I think Tyler Reddick could pose a threat to the championship battle. I don't really see him advancing far into the playoffs. Potentially, maybe he will. He could be a surprise. But I definitely see if he can make it into the playoffs after this weekend. I think he could make it past the round of 16 into the round of 12, which would be very interesting. Another driver I also want to talk about is Kurt Busch, because I think a lot of us maybe see him as a dark horse every weekend, I think myself included, or maybe don't see him as a championship threat. I think a great way for him to end his time at Chip Ganassi Racing would be to get them a championship, and I think it would honestly shock the world a little bit if he did. I'm not saying he's not talented anymore, but I'm saying he is a dark horse. He is not a driver we would expect to sneak up and win the championship title, but I think he's a driver that could really advance far into the playoffs more than we all think. So I would keep an eye out for Kurt Busch. The final driver I see as a potential threat to the championship or a sleeper in the playoffs would be Ryan Blaney. And maybe a lot of you don't see him as a sleeper driver. Maybe you see him more as he's just there, or maybe you see him as a serious threat. And from my point of view, I see him kind of sneaking his way in. He's always there when it counts in the playoffs. I think he always goes farther into the playoffs than we think he will, especially this season, because after the first Pocono race, he has the best average finishing position since that race of any other driver, Kyle Larson included, even though it's by like 0.1, because Ryan Blaney has an average finishing position of 7.3, as Kyle Larson's is 7.4 after the first Pocono race. Nevertheless, he's been doing incredibly well, and someone we haven't focused on because a lot of our brain power has gone towards Hendrick Motorsports' success and Joe Gibbs Racing trying to catch up to them. The Fords have been kind of in the background, and I think either that's a good thing because they will pounce on the opportunity when the playoff time comes, which will be, of course, after this weekend. But this also could mean maybe they're just not good this year. But I think they're saving a little something that we haven't seen yet, especially with Team Penske. I think Ryan Blaney has a long ways to go in the playoffs. I don't see his time getting cut short too fast. And obviously Joey Logano, he's not a dark horse. He's not a sleeper in the playoffs anymore. We know that because he has won a championship. However, I think that he has more to give in the NASCAR Cup Series. This year may not have been the best year for him, but I see him doing more when the time comes in the playoffs. So 3 sleepers in the playoffs. We got Ryan Blaney, we have Kurt Busch, and then we have Tyler Reddick, who I'm going to be looking at pretty closely going into the playoffs, granted that Tyler Reddick makes his way in. The final question we have comes from Brandon. It reads, with Kyle Larson clinching the points, how do you expect or hope the remainder of the season is going to play out for the number 5 team and Team Hendrick with the back-to-back championship possibility? This is a great question, and it really makes me think. I have a history of jinxing drivers, so I'm going to be very cautious here because I do think Kyle Larson has the potential to win the championship. However, I know that we see tragedies happen season after season. Last year in particular, Hamlin dominated, didn't win the title. Harvick dominated, didn't even make it into the championship 4. It was a shock to our systems. I think that could be maybe the same case this year if history tends to repeat itself. We know Kyle Larson is a championship outside the NASCAR Cup Series, and he could be inside the NASCAR Cup Series. It just depends on how well Hendrick Motorsports does. If they can clean up the silly mistakes, I think they all have a shot at winning. The number 5 team in particular with Kyle Larson, I would like them to win 9 races this season. We already have 6 wins, technically 5 if we're not counting the All-Star race. 5 points winning races. I think he could easily hit 4 more to tie with Harvick from last year, and he could potentially exceed that if he keeps his head in the game. And then for Hendrick Motorsports as a whole, I would expect 2 of their drivers, I would say at least, that could also be a bold prediction, to make their way into the championship 4. I'm not going to say who I think those drivers are until next week, and yet again, I'm still going to tread very lightly on those waters in the case that I jinx a driver. But I would expect 2 of the teammates to make it into the championship 4, which could be detrimental as they gotta work together, or it could be very great as 2 teammates can work together for one of them to win the championship. But we're not there yet. I'm not gonna make predictions until we have the playoff picture next week for Hendrick Motorsports in particular, but I think they do have a fair shot of going back-to-back this season based on their dominance. I don't think it's impossible. So let's keep that in mind as we go into the next weekend's race, or this weekend's race for Daytona, closing out the regular season, going into the playoffs. So those are my answers to your questions. Thank you all so much for sending them in using the hashtag ATYL podcast. I love answering all your questions, and I'm excited to continue to do that. So keep sending me your thoughts, your opinions, your hot takes, anything you got, send them my way, and I'm very excited to discuss them with you all. But now let's take a step back and dive into this weekend's race, the Coke Zero Sugar 400 at Daytona International Speedway, the final race before the playoffs and the final race of the regular season.
Starting with some track facts, the track length is 2.5 miles long. The race length is 400 miles or 160 laps. Stage 1 and 2 are 50 laps each, and the final stage will be 60 laps. Now it's time to line up the field for this weekend. Now the lineup is interesting, with Hendrick Motorsports teammates Larson and Byron leading the charge this weekend on the front row, and Joe Gibbs Racing teammates three-time Daytona 500 winner Denny Hamlin and then Kyle Busch on the second row, and right behind them, rounding out the top five, is Chase Elliott. So this will be a Joe Gibbs Racing and Hendrick Motorsports packed front three rows, which will be incredibly interesting to watch and see what happens. With lining up the field, we gotta move to lining up the odds. Now, the last driver to win at this track, of course, was Michael McDowell with his Daytona 500 win. The active driver with the most wins at this track is Denny Hamlin with 3 wins, as mentioned. The active driver with the best average finish at the track. Now, of the drivers in the field this weekend with 3 or more starts, according to NASCAR.com, is Austin Dillon with the best average finishing position of 14.4. Then behind him is Bubba Wallace with an average finishing position of 15.13. Then Denny Hamlin with a finishing position of 15.97. The team with the most wins at the track is a tie between Wood Brothers Racing and Hendrick Motorsports with 15 wins each. And finally, the manufacturer with the most wins at the track is, of course, Chevrolet.
Now the time has come to give my race winning picks, and Daytona is a crapshoot. I say this with every super speedway race. I will say it on repeat, but you never know who's going to win. There's 3 drivers in particular I look at to stir up the pot. That is Ross Chastain, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., and I think I'm going to add Tyler Reddick into that mix. Drivers that make gutsy calls that either work in their favor or not. They could get them out of the race with the calls that they make, or they could advance their positions. All 3 are pretty decent at super speedway races, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. in particular, so we have to look at them. And then we have to look at the 3 main teams in this series. I would say those teams are Hendrick Motorsports, Joe Gibbs Racing, and Penske. Penske will do what it takes to win. We saw this at Daytona last time we were there. Hendrick Motorsports has a stellar super speedway program that will advance them very far in this race. And Joe Gibbs Racing, though the Toyotas are very few in numbers, if they team up with the right manufacturer to get them through drafting and pit stops, they have the potential of winning this weekend, especially Denny Hamlin potentially getting his first win of the season. We also have to look finally at a dark horse team of Roush Fenway Racing. Their drivers are usually there at the end when it matters, making a charge for the lead and the win. But now it's time to go into my garage pick. This weekend at Daytona International Speedway, my garage pick is going to be Ross Chastain. Some of my picks are a little unconventional because I am expecting the unexpected. But Ross could make a move that plays into his favor, getting him the win. I also think why I'm putting him in the garage is, like I mentioned with this driver in particular, he could also make a move or pull for a position that could get him taken out of this race. Nevertheless, I think he's going to do what it takes to win, so he's in the back pocket for this weekend. But my race-winning pick, someone I don't think any of us would expect, I'm going to choose Daniel Suarez to win the race this weekend because I think he has a great backing behind him, a very enthusiastic team leader. I think he's a very quiet player this weekend going into the playoffs, potentially if he's able to win. I also think, too, that he is a strong driver. He is also a gutsy driver. He takes no crap from anybody. I think that attitude could and might possibly get him a win this weekend at the Coke Zero Sugar 400. Now I'm wondering, is your race pick as unusual as mine? Let me know in the comments below, and thank you all so much for listening to Above the Yellow Line, the show where we talk all about the NASCAR Cup Series and beyond. Make sure you tune in this Saturday. I will say it again for the crowd. Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for the Coke Zero 400 on NBC. Make sure to follow on my Twitter page for all the latest NASCAR updates, fan questions, discussions, and more. And make sure to check out the Podium Finish on their social media page for more race coverage, and check out their website for great motorsports content with driver interviews and more. All linked in the description below. But before you check out those links, make sure you subscribe to the channel and like this video, share this with your friends and family, and again, thank you all so much for supporting Above the Yellow Line. And until next time, I'll see ya.